"Officer, I need this squatter arrested now." The HOA president shrieked into her phone, stomping across my porch with forged legal papers clutched like a weapon. This unhinged Karen genuinely believed she could bulldoze my cabin and snatch the land for her shady schemes. What she didn't realize was one tiny detail about me that would unravel her entire empire. The most feared woman in Crestview had just tangled with the wrong foe, and her downfall is about to be nothing short of biblical. Drop a comment where you're watching from, because this showdown is one for the ages. That morning, I was nestled in my cabin, poring over a property line map spread across my oak table, the quiet hum of the valley wrapping around me, when the door burst open with a bang that shook the windows. There stood Karen Prescott, her designer heels sinking into my welcome mat, her face contorted with a fury so intense it strained her. Botox to the limit. The president of the Crestview HOA had arrived, armed for battle. "You need to demolish this eyesore immediately," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger at my lovingly maintained cabin. "My developer friend called this morning, and he's right, this shack is blocking a major project that could transform our community. I won't have some vagrant dragging down property values in my jurisdiction." Her voice escalated with every word, a shrill fire alarm that wouldn't quit. I set down my coffee mug deliberately, masking the anger simmering beneath a calm exterior. "Mrs. Prescott, this cabin sits on my private land, well outside your HOA boundaries. You have no authority here," I said, pointing to the map and tracing the stark line separating Crestview from my property. "See this? That's where your kingdom ends and my valley begins. Your developer friend must have missed that little detail." Her face flushed a deep crimson, and I could almost see steam rising from her perfectly coiffed hair. "Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. Will narrate your story on our channel." She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands, jabbing at the screen like she was trying to stab it. "I'm calling the police right now. You're trespassing on community-adjacent land, and I have witnesses." She gestured wildly at the empty forest around us, apparently seeing an audience where only pine trees stood. 20 minutes later, Deputy Ryan Foster's cruiser pulled up, and I couldn't help but smirk as he stepped out. Ryan and I went way back to high school, and the slight eye roll he gave when he saw Karen told me everything I needed to know about how this would go. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and explain the situation," Ryan said, pulling out his notepad. With practiced patience, Karen launched into a theatrical performance that would have made Shakespeare proud, complete with hand gestures and fake tears. "This squatter is destroying our community values. He's built an illegal structure that's attracting wildlife and lowering our property values. I demand you arrest him immediately." Ryan listened politely, then turned to me with barely concealed amusement. "Nathan, can you show me your property documentation?" I handed over the deed, watching Karen's face as Ryan confirmed what I've been trying to tell her. "Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Harper owns this land, free and clear. This cabin is completely legal and outside HOA jurisdiction." But then Ryan noticed something. "That's for community security purposes." Ryan shook his head, making notes. "Installing surveillance equipment on private property without consent is illegal, Mrs. Prescott. I'll be logging this in my report." Some fences protect land, but mine protects dignity, and Karen had just crossed both. Karen stormed off, but within hours, my phone started buzzing with notifications she'd posted on Crestview's social media page, complete with photos of my cabin taken from various angles. Urgent blight on our community. This illegal structure threatens everything we've built in Crestview. We must unite to save our neighborhood, save Crestview community first. The post was already gathering comments, and I recognized several neighbors' names, among those calling for action. My cabin, which had stood peacefully for decades, was suddenly public enemy number one. By evening, cars were slowly driving past their occupants, filming and taking pictures, like they were documenting a crime scene. Karen had turned my quiet sanctuary into a spectacle, and she was just getting started. I was still processing the social media assault when my laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was the Crestview HOA official account, but something was off. The recipient list included not just me, but what looked like Karen's personal contacts. My AI scanned the message, and I had to read it twice to believe what I was seeing. Survey team scheduled for tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Make sure the boundary stakes are moved before they arrive. N. Harper won't know what hit him. Remember, we need those property lines to show encroachment. The developer is counting on us to deliver. The email was clearly meant for someone else, probably sent to me by mistake, and Karen's fury. She's one tiara short of a throne, I thought, but apparently she just handed me her entire battle plan. Walter Brooks avoided my gaze when I ran into him at the local store that evening. The longtime HOA member mumbled something about Curran being relentless before hurrying away with his groceries. I'd known Walter for years. He was one of the few reasonable voices in Crestview, but even he seemed afraid to be seen talking to me. The social pressure was already building, and Karen had only been at this for one day. I headed home, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. Karen thought she could bulldoze me like she did everyone else who stood in her way, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. My uncle hadn't left me this valley, so some suburban Napoleon could steal it for a profit. That night I sat on my porch, looking out over the valley that had been in my family for 3 generations. The email glowed on my laptop screen, evidence of Karen's planned deception. Did she want to play dirty? Fine, but she should have done her homework first. Nathan Harper, the quiet park ranger who kept to himself, was about to show Karen Prescott exactly why you don't mess with someone who knows every inch of their land and every law that protects it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I started composing my response to her public meeting invitation. Dear Crestview HOA Board, thank you for your interest in my property. However, as it exists outside your jurisdiction, I must respectfully decline your invitation. My land, my rules. Sincerely, Nathan Harper, owner of Pineview Valley. Short, sweet, and guaranteed to make Karen's blood pressure spike. As I hit send, I noticed headlights approaching through the trees, multiple vehicles moving slowly and deliberately. Karen's email had mentioned tomorrow night, but apparently she'd moved up her timeline. I grabbed my flashlight and camera, a cold smile spreading across my face. Karen Prescott thought she was bringing a survey crew to my land under cover of darkness, but what she didn't know was that I'd spent 3 years preparing for exactly this kind of threat. Every inch of my property was documented, photographed, and legally protected. Karen's email gave me her plan, but she's got a crew heading to my cabin tonight, and I don't even know it yet. The surveyors arrived at dawn, not at night, as the email had indicated. Karen's first tactical air I watched from my kitchen window as 3 men in orange vests tramped across my property line, planting stakes and unfurling measuring tapes like they owned the place. The lead surveyor, a heavy-set man with a clipboard, directed his team to erect signs that made my blood boil: danger zone, encroachment under investigation. They worked quickly and efficiently, like they'd done this before. Within an hour, my peaceful valley looked like a construction site, complete with yellow tape and warning signs that screamed one message to anyone passing by: Nathan Harper was a trespasser on his own land. I stepped outside, camera in hand, and approached the lead surveyor with measured calm. "Morning, gentlemen. I'm Nathan Harper, the owner of this property. Can I ask what you're doing here?" The man barely glanced up from his clipboard, his tone dismissive and rehearsed. "We're conducting a boundary survey. At the request of the Crestview Homeowners Association, there are concerns about encroachment on community property." I kept my voice steady, despite the anger rising in my chest. "Do you have written permission to be on my land? Because without it, you're trespassing." He finally looked at me, then a smirk playing on his lips. "Mrs. Prescott said you might say that. She also said to remind you that property disputes are settled by surveys, not by squatters. Making claims will be done in a few hours." The deliberate use of the word squatter told me everything. Karen had poisoned the well before they'd even arrive. By noon, the damage to my reputation was spreading faster than wildfire. In August, I'd gone to the town hall to file a formal complaint. But the whispers started before I even reached the clerk's desk. "That's him," someone muttered, "the one causing all the trouble in Crestview." A neighbor I'd known for years, Harold Morrison, confronted me near the water fountain, his face red with indignation. "You're tanking our property values with this stunt, Harper. My wife saw those danger signs. We've got potential buyers coming this weekend. You need to stop being selfish and think about the community." I tried to explain, but Harold walked away before I could finish, shaking his head like I was some kind of pariah. The social pressure was mounting, exactly as Karen had planned, turning neighbors into enemies with surgical precision. But then something unexpected happened as I sat in my truck outside the town hall, feeling the weight of the community's judgment. A knock on my window made me jump. Sophie Bennett stood there, glancing around nervously before sliding into the passenger seat. Sophie had been the HOA's temporary secretary last year before Karen had publicly humiliated her at a meeting, reducing her to tears over a minor filing error. "Nathan, I need to show you something," she whispered, pulling out a manila folder. "I kept copies of everything when I worked for them. Call it insurance. These are meeting records that Karen made me alter, and there's something here about your property that doesn't add up." Her hands shook as she handed me the papers, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Karen's reach was long, and crossing her came with consequences. The documents were a goldmine of deception: meeting minutes that had been changed, votes that had been miscounted, and buried in the middle, an email thread: developer willing to pay triple market value for combined parcels, need creative solution for the stubborn owner. The emails were dated 3 months ago, long before Karen's sudden interest in my cabin. But as I read deeper, something felt wrong. One of the documents showed my signature on a variance request I'd never seen, dated just last week. "Sophie, this is fake," I said, showing her the forged signature. Her face palled, and she grabbed the paperback. "Oh God, I gave you the wrong folder." this is what she's planning to use against you. The real documents are in my car. I'm so sorry, I'm just terrified she'll find out I'm helping you. We agreed to meet later for the real files, but the seed of doubt was planted. Was Sophie really trying to help, or was this another of Karen's elaborate plays? The town hall meeting that evening was a carefully orchestrated disaster. Karen had commandeered the microphone before the official business even started, her voice filling the room with righteous indignation. Friends, neighbors, we face a crisis. There's a blight on our community, a danger to our children, a threat to everything we've built together in Crestview. She actually paused for dramatic effect, like she was auditioning for community theater. Nathan Harper's illegal structure isn't just an eyesore, it's a symbol of what happens when we let outsiders threaten our way of life. The crowd murmured agreement, and I saw phones coming out to record. She was building her narrative, brick by brick, and I was being buried beneath it. When I tried to speak, requesting time at the microphone, the crowd erupted in shouts and accusations. Sit down, nobody wants to hear from you. Think about our kids. The meeting devolved into chaos, with Karen standing at the podium like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of hate. Ryan texted me during the meeting, "Boss is breathing down my neck about the Crestview situation. Can't openly help right now, but keep documenting everything." Even my oldest ally was being pressured into silence. Sophie caught my eye from across the room, nodding slightly toward the exit. I slipped out during a particularly heated exchange about property values, finding her by the back entrance with a thick envelope. "The real documents," she said, pressing them into my hands. "Karen made me create fake survey records showing your cabin in 10 feet onto HOA common land. The real surveys from the county show you're actually 50 feet inside your own property line. She's planning to submit the fake ones to court if you don't sell." Her voice dropped even lower. "Nathan, she's meeting with someone big tomorrow night. I heard her on the phone mention your name and something about finalizing the agreement. She thinks she's already won." I drove home through streets I'd known my whole life, feeling like a stranger in my own town. The danger zone signs glowed in my headlights. As I pulled up to my cabin, their presence, a constant reminder of Karen's invasion. But as I opened Sophie's envelope, studying the real documents by lamplight, something became crystal clear. Karen had made a crucial mistake in her hunger for power and profit. She'd created a paper trail of fraud, so detailed that it would be her undoing. The email from earlier suddenly made sense. She wasn't just trying to steal my land, she was trying to flip the entire valley to a developer for a massive payday hero. She's a walking disaster, Sophie had whispered, and now I had the proof to show everyone exactly what kind of hero Karen Prescott really was. I spent the rest of the night organizing evidence and preparing for war. Karen thought she had me cornered, but she had no idea what she'd awakened. I just found Karen's dirty email, but she's meeting a big shot tonight, and I overheard her mention my name. The morning brought a new level of warfare when an official-looking sedan pulled up to my cabin. James Martinez, a city licensing official, stepped out with a briefcase and the kind of fake smile that meant trouble. "Mr. Harper, I'm here regarding serious allegations about the legitimacy of your property ownership. Mrs. Prescott has presented compelling evidence that your deed may have been forged." His words hit like a physical blow, each syllable carefully chosen to sound official and damning. I invited him in, maintaining composure While my mind raced through the implications, Karen wasn't just attacking my cabin anymore. She was trying to erase my entire claim to the valley. As Martinez spread his documents across my table, pointing to supposed inconsistencies in my deed, I realized the depth of Karen's connection. This wasn't some random inspection. This was a coordinated assault using the city government as a weapon. The confrontation escalated when an HOA enforcer tried to post a cease and desist notice on my cabin door. While Martinez was still inside, I caught him in the act, his hammer raised to drive the nail into my grandfather's handcrafted woodwork. "Step away from my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous. The enforcer, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, tried to stand his ground. "I have authorization from the Crestview HOA board to post this notice. You're interfering with official business." The absurdity of it, an HOA enforcer claiming authority on private land, would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. Martinez watched the exchange with interest, making notes that I knew would end up in Karen's hands when I blocked the enforcer physically. Standing between him and my door, he backed down, but made sure to photograph me doing it. "That's assault," he said loudly enough for Martinez to hear. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." Another piece of Karen's puzzle, another trap laid carefully in my path. By afternoon, the social isolation was complete. At the grocery store, conversation stopped. When I walked by the cashier, whose son I'd taught to fish just last summer, avoided eye contact and mumbled through our transaction. Outside, Mrs. Chen, who'd brought me soup when I was sick last winter, crossed the street to avoid me. The small kindnesses that made a community were being withdrawn one by one, leaving me alone in a town I'd called home for 32 years. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, fingers tapping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of it all, this whole valley, and I'm trapped. In a corner, the land my uncle had entrusted to me, the legacy of 3 generations, was slipping through my fingers because of one woman's greed. For a moment, just a moment, I considered giving up. Maybe it would be easier to sell to take Karen's money and start over somewhere else. The thought made me sick, but the exhaustion was real. Then Sophie appeared at my truck window again, but this time she wasn't alone. Walter Brooks stood beside her, looking older than his 65 years and carrying the weight of obvious guilt. "We need to talk," Walter said, glancing around nervously. All 3 of us, we drove to a quiet spot overlooking the valley, and Walter's confession spilled out like water from a broken dam. 3 years ago, Karen tried to buy this valley from your uncle. When he refused, she threatened to use eminent domain to have the city declare it blighted. She had connections, documentation, and everything lined up. Your uncle came to me for help, and I took her money to stay quiet. His eyes were wet with unshed tears. $10. 0 to look the other way while she pressured him. But your uncle was tougher than she expected. He found a way to protect the land and made it untouchable. Karen's been waiting for him to die ever since, thinking you'd be easier to break the revelation. Hit hard. My uncle had fought this same battle, and he'd won, but he'd fought it alone, betrayed by people he'd trusted. Sophie handed me a conservation group pamphlet pointing to a highlighted section. Your uncle started this process, but never finished it. If you complete the application, the valley gets protected status. No development ever. I found this in the HOA files when I worked there. Karen knows about it. That's why she's moving so fast. I stared at the pamphlet, remembering now the emails I'd exchanged with the conservation group months ago, thinking it was just about tax benefits. My uncle had laid the groundwork for the ultimate protection, and I'd been too naive to see it. Walter pulled out his phone and showed me a video. She's been spreading this around the HOA board, claiming you threatened her, but watch her hands at the 30-second mark. The video showed Karen at my cabin, but at exactly 30 seconds, her hand went to her pocket where she'd palmed something. That's when she planted the camera. Walter said, I've seen her do it before. She records herself being the victim, then edits out anything that doesn't fit her narrative. That evening alone in my cabin, I played my uncle's last voicemail. I'd saved it, but hadn't listened since the funeral. Too painful to hear his voice. Nathan, if you're listening to this, something's happened to me. The valley is yours now, but you need to know there are people who want to take it. Karen Prescott is the worst of them. She's got a developer named Richardson backing her, and they've got plans for the whole valley. Don't let them win, son. Don't let anyone tear this place apart. The conservation papers are on the desk, the second drawer finish. What I started, this land isn't just property, it's a trust. Guard it well. His voice, strong even in his final days, filled my small cabin. I found the papers exactly where he'd said, along with detailed notes about Karen's previous attempts. My uncle had been building a case for 3 years, documenting every threat, every bribe attempt, every dirty trick, and tomorrow Karen was meeting with Richardson to finalize their plan. Thinking I was beaten, I stood outside, looking over the valley in the fading light, my uncle's words echoing in my mind. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring a legacy, protecting something greater than property values or HOA. La politics guardian. She's a bulldozer, Sophie had said, and she was right, but bulldozers could be stopped if you knew where to place the barriers. I opened my laptop and began composing emails to the conservation group, to Ryan, to a lawyer my uncle had recommended in his notes. Karen thought she'd broken me, thought I'd crumble under the pressure, but she'd made a critical error. She'd given me a reason to fight that went beyond myself. Tomorrow, she would walk into her meeting with Richardson, carrying documents she thought would seal my fate, showing a document tomorrow with my signature saying I sold my land, but I never signed anything. The live streamed HOA meeting was Karen's biggest production yet, complete with professional lighting and multiple camera angles that would make a news crew jealous. I sat in the back row, watching her transform the community center into her personal theater. She'd even hired someone to run the streaming equipment, broadcasting her lies to hundreds of viewers online. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see will shock you, Karen announced, holding up a manila folder like it was evidence in a murder trial. I have here irrefutable proof that Nathan Harper's ownership claims are not just questionable, they're completely fraudulent. The crowd leaned forward, phones raised to capture every moment. She was building to something big, and the anticipation in the room was electric. This document, authenticated by city officials, proves that the signature on Nathan Harper's deed is a forgery. She pulled out the papers with a flourish that would have made a magician proud. The document she displayed on the projection screen looked official enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. There was my name at the bottom, but the signature was wrong, close enough to pass casual inspection, but clearly not mine to anyone who'd seen me sign anything before. The crowd gasped on cue, and I heard someone whisper about calling the FBI. Karen stood at the podium like a prosecutor who just delivered the killing blow, her smile so wide it threatened to crack her foundation. Furthermore, I have testimony from a city licensing official who visited Mr. Harper's property yesterday and found numerous violations and inconsistencies in his documentation. James Martinez has signed an affidavit stating that, in his professional opinion, the deed Mr. Harper claims to hold is suspect at best, fraudulent at worst. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs, and I felt every eye in the room turned toward me with judgment and disgust. Local news had picked up the story within hours, and now a reporter stood in the corner, her cameraman capturing every moment of my public humiliation. My phone buzzed with notifications as the false reports spread across news sites and community forums. Local man's property claims under investigation. One headline read, another was worse, squatter or owner Pineview Valley dispute escalates. Standing outside the police station after the meeting trying to file a report about the forged documents, I felt the world closing in my hands shook as I filled out the forms, knowing that every moment I spent defending myself was another moment. Karen's lies spread unchecked. Ryan passed by, unable to stop, but catching my eye long enough to mouth hang in there. Even here, in what should have been neutral ground, I felt like a criminal trying to prove his innocence. But then Walter appeared at my elbow, speaking quietly while pretending to fill out his own forms. That signature Martinez authenticated. He wasn't even in the country when it was supposedly notarized. I pulled his travel records. He was at a conference in Brazil. Karen must have paid him to lie, but she didn't check his alibi. My heart jumped at this. First crack in Karen's armor, Sophie materialized from behind a pillar, glancing around nervously before whispering urgently. The survey company Karen hired, they're being investigated for fraud in 3 other states. Ryan found the connection and sent me the files. They specialize in adjusting property lines for the right price. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed to act fast. All eyes on me. I'm ready, I thought, already formulating my counterattack. The live stream was still going, and Karen had made the fatal mistake of keeping it running while she gloated. I marched back into the community center, ignoring the hostile stares and whispered accusations. Karen was still at the podium, basking in her perceived victory, when I approached the microphone. Mrs. Prescott, since you're so interested in authenticity, let's discuss the survey your company conducted on my property. I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the projection system before she could stop me. This email, sent from your account to mine by mistake, clearly shows you instructing the survey team to move boundary stakes before the official measurement. The crowd's anger shifted confusion, replacing certainty. I continued, my voice steady and clear. Furthermore, the signature you claim proves my deed is fake. It was supposedly notarized on March 15th. Interesting, considering the notary you claim witnessed it was in Brazil that entire week. The projection screen showed Martinez's conference registration, his smiling face in a group photo dated March 16th in São Paulo. Sophie stepped forward from the crowd, her voice carrying despite her obvious nerves. I have something to add, she said, producing a tablet. These are the real survey records from the county, showing Mr. Harper's property lines haven't changed in 50 years. The survey Karen commissioned shows different boundaries because they literally moved the stakes. I have photos of them doing it, timestamps included. The crowd began to shift restlessly, phones now pointed at Karen instead of me. The reporter moved closer, her microphone extended toward the podium where Karen stood frozen. This is manufactured evidence, Karen sputtered, her composure cracking. He's obviously created these documents to discredit me, but the damage was done. Walter stood up, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I move to table any HOA action regarding Mr. Harper's property until a full investigation can be conducted. Several board members seconded immediately, and Karen's perfect production crumbled into chaos. The meeting devolved into arguments and accusations, with Karen desperately trying to regain control. You're all being fooled. I'm trying to protect our community. Her voice had climbed too near hysteria, and I noticed the live stream comments section exploding with viewers calling her out. Fraud Queen added again. One comment read, Ryan, apparently watching from his patrol car, had sent a message to Sophie. She's shooting her own foot. The reporter cornered Karen as she tried to leave, peppering her with questions about the forged signature and fraudulent survey. Karen's answers were a mess of contradictions and blame shifting, each word digging her hole deeper. By the time she finally escaped to her car, her reputation was in tatters, and the live stream had been shared hundreds of times, with titles like HOA President exposed and Karen gets caught red-handed. I stood in the parking lot afterward, Sophie and Walter flanking me like bodyguards. She's not done, Walter warned, his expression grim. Karen doesn't know how to lose. She'll come back with something worse. Sophie nodded, still clutching her tablet. Like a shield, I've been backing up every email, every document from the HOA cloud. There's something else, Nathan. She's been recording conversations and building some kind of video compilation. I saw the file names but couldn't access them. My jaw tightened as I processed this information. She's good at acting. I'm better at winning, I thought already. Preparing for the next round, Sophie showed me her phone where a notification had just popped up. The HOA cloud just updated. There's a new video file labeled Final Evidence, uploaded 10 minutes ago. We exchanged glances, knowing this was far from over. Your game's over, Karen, I thought. But even as the words formed in my mind, I knew she had one more card to play. Karen sent a video to the to destroy me, but I just saw a clip of her voice, and it's got something that could ruin us both. The final HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday night, and the community center was packed. Beyond capacity, news of the previous meeting's drama had spread throughout the state, drawing spectators, reporters, and even a documentary crew investigating HOA corruption. I arrived early, my grandfather's leather portfolio containing the original deed to Pineview Valley tucked under my arm. The weight of 3 generations rested in those papers, and tonight I would finally reveal the truth that my uncle had protected so carefully. Karen sat at the board table, her usual designer outfit replaced with a conservative black suit that screamed victim. She'd even toned down her makeup, going for a natural look that made her appear vulnerable and trustworthy. The transformation was remarkable, from corporate shark to wounded lamb. In less than a week, I had to admire the effort, even as I recognized it for the manipulation it was. Before we begin, I said, standing to address the room, I want to present something to the board and the community. I opened the portfolio with deliberate care, revealing documents that predated the HOA by decades. This is the original deed to Pineview Valley, including the land my cabin sits on. It's been in my family since 1947, when my grandfather purchased it from the state. More importantly, this document shows that my property extends well beyond what any recent survey claims. In fact, the original Crestview development had to get an easement from my uncle, just to build the access road you all use daily. The room buzzed with surprise, but I wasn't finished. I've kept this ownership quiet because I value my privacy, not because I have anything to hide, but Mrs. Prescott's actions have forced me to defend what's rightfully mine. I handed copies to each board member, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to understanding. Karen's response was pure theater. Her eyes welled with tears that appeared on cue, her voice trembling as she stood to address the crowd. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Nathan Harper has been threatening me for weeks, telling me he'd destroy my reputation if I didn't stop investigating his illegal activities. I have proof, messages, voicemails, even video evidence of his harassment." She pulled out her phone, connecting it to the projection system with shaking hands. "I didn't want to share this because I was terrified, but you all need to see who we're really dealing with." The crowd leaned forward, and I felt the momentum shifting again. She was good to good. The video started to play, showing grainy footage of someone who looked like me approaching her car at night. Voice muffled, but threatening, "Back off, Karen, or you'll regret it." The figure said the resemblance was uncanny, and several people gasped. But Sophie was ready. She'd been working all night, and the exhaustion showed in her face, but her eyes blazed with determination. "That's an interesting video, Mrs. Prescott," she said, standing up with her laptop. "But before we all rushed to judgment, I have something to share as well." Her hands trembled as she connected to the projection system, but her voice was steady. "As some of you know, I used to work for the HOA. What you don't know is that I maintained access to the cloud storage system, legally, I might add, since my credentials were never revoked. Last night I noticed something interesting in the backup folders." She clicked play, and Karen's voice filled the room, but this time from a different video, one she clearly never meant anyone to see. Karen's voice boasted, "My lawyer says the fake harassment video is perfect. Who's going to question a crying woman with evidence?" Board members shot to their feet, voices raised in outrage. The documentary crew pushed forward, cameras rolling as Karen's face went from tearful victim to cornered predator in seconds. That's taken out of context," she stammered, but more audio continued to play. "The survey company did exactly what I paid them for. Those idiots actually believed the property lines had changed." Her own laughter, cruel and mocking, filled the room. "Once Harper's gone, Richardson and I will make millions on that development. The whole valley will be ours." Sophie clicked on another file, this one showing, "Make sure the voice modulation matches Harper's. I've got recordings of him from the town hall meeting we can use." The evidence was damning, each word another nail in Karen's coffin. The crowd turned on her in a tide-changing direction. People who'd supported her just days ago now looked at her with disgust and betrayal. Someone shouted, "Resign," and others took up the chant. Karen tried to speak, to explain, but her microphone was cut off. A board member I'd never seen before stood up, his face red with anger. I motioned for the immediate removal of Karen Prescott as HOA president, pending a full investigation into fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. The motion was seconded instantly, and the vote was unanimous. Even Karen's closest allies abandoned her, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. The documentary producer approached her with his camera, asking for a comment. Karen just stared at the lens, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, before grabbing her purse and rushing for the exit. But Sophie wasn't done. "There's more," she announced, her voice carrying over the chaos. "The developer she mentioned, Richardson. He's been investigated for similar schemes in 2 other states. Mrs. Prescott has been taking payments from him for months, funneling them through a shell company. It's all here in the financial records." The evidence kept flowing, each revelation worse than the last. Bank statements, text messages, recorded phone calls. Karen had been sloppy in her arrogance, never imagining her digital fortress could be breached. The reporter who'd covered the story from the beginning was typing furiously on her phone, and within minutes, the scandal had gone viral. HOA president's corruption, exposed in live meeting, was already trending, with clips of Karen's confession spreading across the internet faster than wildfire. I stood in the center of it all, feeling Sophie's hand on my shoulder as she smiled with exhausted triumph. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly, though Karen had already fled. The room slowly emptied as people processed what they'd witnessed, many approaching me to apologize for believing Karen's lies. Walter shook my hand firmly, respect in his eyes. "Your uncle would be proud," he said simply. Ryan appeared in uniform, having watched the entire thing from the back of the room. "The district attorneys already called." Sophie nodded. "Already organizing the files, every email, every document, every recording. It's all backed up and ready." Karen's begging now. "Karen's lawyer just slapped me with a lawsuit by tomorrow. But I've got a secret meeting tonight that could flip this whole fight." The lawsuit arrived at 7 the next morning, delivered by a process server who looked embarrassed to be there. $150. Zero in damages for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation. Karen was swinging wildly now, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of her empire. But I'd spent the previous night preparing for exactly this move. My meeting hadn't been secret at all. I'd invited Ryan to witness everything, creating an official record of what was about to unfold. Karen thought she was playing chess while everyone else played checkers, but she hadn't realized I'd been thinking 10 moves ahead. Since the day she'd barged into my cabin, the lawsuit was her last gambit, and Chen, the conservation lawyer my uncle had recommended in a small office overlooking the valley. "Your uncle was a smart man," Marcus said, reviewing the documents I'd assembled. "He knew that protecting the land legally was the only way to keep vultures like Prescott at bay. The conservation easement he started is ironclad. Once enacted, no development can ever touch this valley." He pulled out a thick folder of his own, smiling grimly. "But what's really interesting is what my investigator found about Karen's business dealings. She's been promising Richardson something she never had the power to deliver. That's a fraud. And Richardson is not a forgiving man when he's been played." The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Marcus had arranged for someone to attend. "Attempts to sell your land, even after last night's exposure." She took the bait beautifully. Out her entire plan to a room full of his associates. "The lawsuit will force Harper to sell." Her voice explained confidently. "Once I win, I'll have a lien on the property. He'll have no choice but to negotiate, and then we can proceed with the development as planned." She went on to detail how she'd hidden assets in offshore accounts and how the HOA had been funding her legal battles, using emergency reserves meant for community maintenance. "Richardson promised me $2 million as my finder's fee. That's on top of what we'll make from the land sales." But the best part came when someone asked about the conservation easement that died with the old man. Karen laughed. "His nephew doesn't even know it exists." By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. Ryan's contribution was the final piece of the puzzle. His investigation had uncovered a pattern of fraud extending back years. The survey company she hired, they've just been indicted in Nevada. The FBI is very interested in their client list. And guess whose name keeps coming up? He showed me a federal complaint that read like the greatest hits of Karen's schemes. She's been doing this to other property owners, using the same playbook. There's a couple in Riverside who lost their home to her tactics 2 years ago. They're ready to testify. The criminal investigation was already underway, and Karen had no idea the net was closing. My captain says the district attorney wants to make an example of her HOA. Corruption has been a growing problem, and this case is perfect, documented, viral, and with a clear pattern of criminal behavior. That afternoon, I sat in my cabin, reviewing everything one last time. The conservation papers were completed and filed with both state and federal authorities. The valley would be protected in perpetuity, just as my uncle had wanted. Sophie called with updates from the HOA emergency meeting. They've frozen all accounts pending audit. Turns out Karen diverted over $300. Zero to her personal projects. The forensic accountants are having a field day. Through my window I could see news vans still parked at the community center. The story had legs, and every new revelation added fuel to the fire. Walter had emerged as the interim HOA president, his first act being a formal apology to me and a promise of reform. We're implementing term limits, he'd announced. Never again will one person hold this much power. The universe seemed to be delivering poetic justice when Richardson himself called me that evening. Mr. Harper, I believe we need to talk. His voice was cold, professional, it seems. I've been misled about certain aspects of our potential transaction. I could hear the controlled fury beneath his calm words. Mrs. Prescott assured me she had a clear path to acquisition. Now I find out she's been lying from day one. That's bad for business, and I don't tolerate people who waste my time. I expressed appropriate sympathy while secretly enjoying every moment. Richardson had a reputation for destroying those who crossed him legally, of course, but thoroughly. I'll be pursuing my own remedies, he continued. But I wanted you to know that any perceived alliance between me and Mrs. Prescott is definitively terminated. In fact, if you need any assistance in your legal matters, the enemy of my enemy, as they say. I thanked him politely and ended the call, knowing Karen had just lost her biggest backer. That night I stood in the valley my grandfather had bought with his life savings, that my uncle had protected with his cunning, and that I had now secured for future generations. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by the light pollution from Crestview. Tomorrow I will file my countersuit armed with evidence of Karen's fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. The conservation easement would be announced, ending any dreams of development forever. But tonight I simply existed in the peace of knowing I'd won. I won't fail you, Uncle, I thought, remembering my moment of doubt. The phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Karen's been arrested. Fraud charges. It's on the news now. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't need to see her perp walk or hear the reporters dissect her fall. Justice had been served. And that was enough. Finished. I'm just torching your scam, I'd thought during the battle. Now the fire had consumed everything Karen had built on lies and greed. Karen's walking into court with her ace card, but I've got someone on the inside, and She just sent me a warning that could change everything. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the morning of Karen's final stand, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the hallway. She walked in wearing a conservative navy suit, flanked by two lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her carefully constructed image of suburban respectability was crumbling with each passing moment, and the desperation in her eyes was visible even from across the room. I sat at the defendant's table with Marcus Chen, feeling the weight of 3 generations of land stewardship on my shoulders. But this time, I wasn't carrying it alone. Sophie sat in the gallery behind me, laptop ready, with every piece of evidence organized and indexed. Ryan was in full uniform in the witness section, his presence a reminder that the law was finally on my side. The judge entered, and I could see in her expression that she'd already reviewed the mountain of evidence we'd submitted. This wasn't going to be the easy win Karen had promised her lawyer, Your Honor. Karen's lead attorney began, his voice lacking the conviction his client had paid for. We're here today seeking damages for the deliberate defamation of my client by the defendant, who orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation and standing in the community. The words sounded hollow even as he spoke them, and I noticed him glancing nervously at his notes. Marcus stood slowly, commanding the room with his presence. Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal. Not only are these claims baseless, but we have evidence that Ms. Prescott has engaged in a pattern of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy that makes her the perpetrator, not the victim. He handed a thick folder to the bailiff. Furthermore, the property at the center of this dispute is now under federal protection through a conservation easement that was finalized 72 hours ago. Any claims regarding its development or sale are moot. The judge's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the documents, and I saw the exact moment she realized what Karen had walked into. Ms. Prescott, the judge said, her voice sharp with barely concealed irritation, are you aware that filing a fraudulent lawsuit is a crime? Karen started to speak, but her lawyer quickly placed a hand on her arm. The judge continued, because these documents show that you knew Mr. Harper owned Pineview Valley when you began your campaign against him. Here's an email from you to Mr. Richardson, dated 3 months ago, discussing how to remove the Harper problem from the land you knew you had no claim to. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and the bailiff had to call for order. Furthermore, the judge's voice cut through the noise. There's evidence here of witness tampering, falsified documents, and misuse of HOA funds. Mr. Chen, would you like to present your evidence? Marcus smiled, and I knew Karen was about to experience the full weight of justice. The presentation was methodical, devastating, and complete. Every lie she'd told, every document she'd forged, every person she'd tried to intimidate it, all came out in excruciating detail. Ryan took the stand, next his testimony, adding the official weight of law enforcement to our case. During our investigation, we discovered that Miss Prescott had engaged in similar schemes, targeting 3 other property owners over the past 5 years. The FBI has opened a formal investigation into what appears to be an interstate fraud operation. He presented the recording from Karen's real estate meeting, where she'd admitted to crimes while thinking she was among allies. I'll have a lien on the property. He'll have no choice but to negotiate. Her recorded voice filled the courtroom. The judge's expression darkened with each revelation. When Ryan finished, Karen's lawyers were huddled in frantic whispered conference, but the killing blow came from an unexpected source. Walter Brooks, dressed in his best suit, took the stand as our final witness. "Your Honor, I've been a member of the Crestview HOA for 15 years. Walter began, his voice steady, despite his age. 3 years ago, Karen Prescott came to me with a proposition. She knew Nathan's uncle owned Pineview Valley, and she wanted my help to force him out. When I refused, she threatened to use her position to have my home condemned for bogus violations. He pulled out a small recorder. I've been documenting her threats ever since life's got no warranty. Karen, but karma's got a long memory, and today, yours is being collected with interest." The recording played Karen's voice, making threats that corroborated everything we'd claimed. "You'll lose everything if you don't play ball, Walter. I've destroyed bigger fish than you." The judge had heard enough. She called a brief recess, but we all knew what was coming. Karen sat at her table, the color draining from her face, as her lawyers quietly explained that they'd be withdrawing from the case, and the court resumed. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. "Not only am I dismissing this case with prejudice, but I'm referring all evidence to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Miss Prescott, you've used the legal system as a weapon to intimidate and defraud innocent citizens. This court finds your actions reprehensible." The gavel came down like thunder. "Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Harper's counter in full damages of $500. 0 for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Additionally, you are hereby barred from any position of authority in any homeowners association in this state." Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her perfect facade finally completely shattered. Impossible. She finally managed to stutter, but the judge was already moving on to the criminal referral. The bailiff moved closer to Karen's table, ready to take her into custody when the criminal charges were formally filed outside the courthouse. The scene was chaos news. Crews surrounded us as we emerged, and the viral clip was already being edited with titles like HOA, President's Courtroom Catastrophe, and Karen Gets Destroyed by Judge, a woman I didn't recognize. Approached with tears in her eyes, one of Karen's previous victims from Riverside. "Thank you," she said simply. "You justice, too." Sophie had been elected as the new HOA president that morning in an emergency vote, and her first act was to return all misappropriated funds to community projects. We're also instituting term limits and transparency requirements. She told a reporter, "Those of us never again will someone turn our HOA into a personal dictatorship." Ryan clapped me on the shoulder as Karen was led away in handcuffs. The criminal charges filed faster than anyone expected. "Welcome to reality, Karen," he said with a grin that matched my own. The conservation group had scheduled a ceremony for next week to formally recognize the protection of Pineview Valley, and they'd hinted at a national recognition award for preserving critical habitat. As the sun set over the valley that evening, I stood where my grandfather had once stood, where my uncle had made his last stand, and where I had finally secured our family's legacy. The cabin that had started it all stood proud and untouched, a testament to the power of standing your ground against bullies and corruption. Sophie and Ryan joined me on the porch, raising glasses of my uncle's hidden whiskey in a toast to David finally beating Goliath. Sophie said, "To justice served cold." Ryan added, "To family land and the fences that protect both." I finished some fences. Protect landmine protects. Dignity and today both have been preserved for generations to come. The valley glowed in the golden hour light, free from the threat of development, free from Karen's greed, free to remain. The sanctuary my family had always intended it to be was Karen's Fall Fair. Should HOS face federal investigation, drop your wildest HOA stories in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video.